Hello, everyone, and good evening, and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of the City of Victorville for May 8th, 2024. I'll call this meeting to order, and can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Marsh.
Here.
Commissioner Messon.
Here.
Commissioner Thomas.
Here.
Vice Chair Cook-Askins.
Here.
Chair Kurth.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. If you'll please rise for the invocation that'll be led to us by Commissioner Thomas, followed by the pledge with Vice Chair Cook-Askins Jr.
Heavenly Father, we come to you this evening, thanking you for your grace and mercy. Father, we ask that you just guide us in our deliberations. Father, help us to do those things that will benefit our community. Father, we ask blessings on the staff, the city council, the planning commission, and all citizens of this community. Thank you, Father, for all you do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Next up is the general public comment portion of the meeting. This would be for anyone that would have comments that are not on tonight's agenda. We have 2 items on tonight's agenda. This would be general public comments for any items not on the agenda. Do we have anyone for general public comment?
I have no speaker cards for general public comment.
Thank you. I will close the general public comment section. That brings us to agenda item number 1, a tentative track map. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Chairman Kurth, fellow commissioners. Item number 1 is case PLAN 22-00015. It is a tentative track map with a mitigated negative declaration to allow for the creation of 108 single-family residential lots from approximately 30.1 acres of R1 single-family residential zoned property. This is located at the northeast corner of Mojave Drive and Amethyst Road. The applicant proposes this subdivision to meet all R1 standards, which includes minimum lot sizes of 7,200 square feet and an overall density of 3.8 units per acre, which is below the maximum 5 units per acre. This project was originally brought forward to the Planning Commission in April of this year, however, was continued due to comments we received from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We have since evaluated those comments and incorporated most of the mitigation measures that the Fish and Wildlife Department have requested. However, there are some related to additional focus surveys for the desert tortoise and sensitive plant species that the environmental consultant has responded to and has justified why those items have not been included. Staff has also reviewed those and concurs. To give a little bit more insight on the desert tortoise, it is a protected species. The environmental resource analysis that was done in the initial study did conclude that there was no desert tortoises on site. It also cited a focus study that was done back in 2005. Based on the development that's occurred surrounding this facility, there is not a need based on the biologist's recommendation for additional focus surveys, also related to sensitive plant species, with the exception of the Western Joshua tree. There is mitigation for that plant. The biological assessments show that there's I think there's actually exactly 20 trees on site. So the developer will need to mitigate those impacts as outlined in the mitigation measures in accordance with the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act. Some more information about the track, as you can see on the map here. The developer will be responsible for widening Mojave Drive with a right turn pocket along the southern frontage. Also completing improvements along Amethyst, and then providing a secondary access pavement off-site north on Amethyst to existing pavement on Tawny Ridge Lane. The proposal, if you could switch back to the map again, the proposal includes some lettered lots, which will be reserved for landscaping and/or drainage facilities. And so there is a lot E that is, as you can see here, it's kind of on the northern end of the site. That will be reserved for a park site. It's approximately 3/4 of an acre. Also, the letter lot north of that will serve as a drainage facility, which will also be landscaped and serve a dual use as a monument entry feature with signage at that intersection with Amethyst. With that, the properties surrounding the facility are all also zoned for single-family residential, and the proposal meets all of our municipal code standards. With that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission conduct a public hearing, receive testimony regarding the proposed project, and take the following actions. Adopt the attached mitigated negative declaration with a mitigation monitoring and reporting program for the project, and adopt resolution number P-24-035, approving the tentative track map case number PLAN 22-00015, subject to the attached conditions of approval. And with that, staff's available, and we do have the project's environmental consultant available with any technical questions you have about the environmental analysis.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Webb. Does the commission have any questions for staff on this one?
Excuse me, just one. So the entrance to this subdivision will be off of Amethyst, and there won't be any other entrances then.
That is correct. There is 2 points of entry, both of which are from Amethyst.
I was just wondering on the, I think it mentioned in the staff report that retention basin on the corner, that it would be some kind of a dual use with public use and retention. What would that look like? Just curious. Would that be like hiking pass through there, or so? What would that be?
That is actually designed for a deeper basin, so you'll likely see a portion of it that's fenced, with likely pilasters with landscaping in front of it, possibly a meandering trail along the frontage of that parcel. Hopefully that gives you a visual. The map is conditioned to go through a site plan review where staff will evaluate the aesthetics of that ultimate design before it goes into construction.
Right, similar to the park with any
That is
amenities
correct.
that would offer.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Okay, there's no more questions, then I will open up the public hearing for any comments. I know you mentioned the consultants here. If you have questions for us, you can come up. Are there any questions for the consultant? No. Do we have any speaker cards?
We do not.
Okay. Then with that, I'll go ahead and I will close the public hearing portion, and I'll bring it back to the commission for a determination.
I move I move to approve the project with staff's recommendations.
I, Commissioner Thomas, second the motion.
I have a first by Commissioner Messin, a second by Commissioner Thomas. I'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Marsh,
Yes.
Commissioner Messin,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cook-Askins,
Yes.
Chair Kurth.
Yes,
Motion passes unanimously.
thank you. So that track map Has passed. Congratulations on that. And that moves us on to item number 2, which is amendment to the municipal code. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Agenda item number 2 is case number PLAN 22-0002, an amendment to the Victorville Municipal Code with an environmental exemption, making various changes to Title 16 to regulate the retail sale of alcohol and tobacco for off-site consumption by updating existing operating standards and introducing new operating standards applicable to new and existing businesses within the city of Victorville, which include, but are not limited to, standards relating to property maintenance, alcohol and tobacco display area, alcohol and tobacco signage, tobacco paraphernalia, and the prohibited sales of single-serve alcoholic beverages and drug paraphernalia, as well as initial and annual compliance inspection and licensing processes. As the commission may recall, this item was initially opened for public hearing on March 13th, 2024, and has been continued until tonight's meeting in order to address some revisions to the proposed amendment, largely to ensure compliance with the California Business and Professions Code, as well as ensure that we have a ordinance and proposal that is defensible moving forward should any challenges be made. We do believe in review of the ordinance and the numerous modifications that have been made to it since its first presentation of the Planning Commission, that we do have a document that accomplishes those things. It is in compliance with the California Business and Professions Code. It does meet the standard of previous ordinances and deemed approved ordinances in other jurisdictions that have been challenged and have been upheld. So we do feel that we have a defensible ordinance before you this evening. With that, there is a late edition memo before you that includes very minor changes, essentially grammatical errors, and addressing references that were made to ensure that we're making the right references within our municipal code. Additionally, that late edition memo includes public comments that we received as of 3 p.m. this afternoon. All those comments are in support of the proposed amendment as presented tonight. With that, we have prepared a brief PowerPoint presentation to go over the main points of the amendment and how we got here this evening. So regarding the regulation history, there's been 3 ordinances beginning in 2013 that address alcohol and tobacco sales. These range from first prohibiting single-serve alcoholic beverages to next adding additional off-site alcohol regulations and distance standards, and lastly, in 2015, adding tobacco product and paraphernalia requirements, which was part of a larger effort in 2015 to address problematic uses within the city. Prior to 2013, when these ordinances went into effect, standards were limited to alcohol only. There was no tobacco standards, and those standards focused on over-concentrated census tracts and projects within 300 feet of residential property. The basis for the amendment, currently there are 63 alcohol establishments and 65 tobacco establishments that would be subject to this ordinance. Of those, there are 11 in operation that are subject to conditional use permit operating standards. That leaves 52 businesses that are not subject to any scheduled compliance inspections. They're not subject to any scheduled reviews of conditional use permit or conditions of approval, and they would only be subject to California Business and Professions Code. Additionally, there's no oversight either from the state or local level to ensure compliance in those locations. This can lead to ongoing non-compliance issues with established operating standards, with conditional use permit requirements, as well as state laws. Recently, Senate Bill 793 and AB 935 were passed in the state of California, which prohibited the sale of flavored tobacco throughout California. And currently, there's no procedure in the city of Victorville to ensure establishments are complying with those measures. As an overview of the amendment and what it entails, essentially this updates operating standards for new and existing businesses while implementing performance standards for non-conforming alcohol sales establishments. And these are again in conformance with the California Business and Professions Code. It also clearly prohibits the sale of drug paraphernalia and flavored tobacco and requires annual compliance inspections. One thing of note that changed from the first review of this ordinance and the previous reviews is that this version maintains single-serve alcoholic beverage allowances for non-conforming businesses. That was largely what drove the modifications and the continuance of this item in the past. And in consultation with the city attorney, it was determined that existing businesses that have those allowances for the sale of single-serve alcoholic beverages are permitted to maintain them by California Business and Professions Code. So that has been changed from what we previously reviewed in this ordinance. Existing regulations with regard to alcohol sales. All new alcoholic beverage sales establishments, except for large retailers, which are those over 8,000 square feet in size, and restaurants that serve beer and wine only, are required to obtain a conditional use permit. The finding of public convenience and necessity process is currently in code and is maintained, which essentially limits over-concentrated census tracts, limits alcohol sales to large retailers and fueling stations. And currently in code, off-site alcoholic beverage sales establishments and bars and nightclubs are prohibited within 600 feet of sensitive land uses. Again, this exempts large retailers. These would include your supermarkets, your drugstores, things of that nature. Currently, the code also maintains operational standards for alcohol regulation or alcohol establishments. This includes site standards such as lighting, refuse collection, landscaping maintenance. We also currently prohibit drug paraphernalia, window coverings, and exterior advertising of alcoholic products and tobacco paraphernalia. Again, these are standards that are in code now, but there's no method to ensure compliance currently. With regard to tobacco uses, currently our code limits display area to 10% of the floor area of a business where tobacco sales are allowed. Tobacco products are required to be located behind service counters, and on-site smoking, sales to or by minors, and sales of drug paraphernalia is prohibited. As proposed in this ordinance, we would designate every non-conforming alcoholic beverage sales establishment as a deemed approved establishment. They would still be subject to any previously approved CUPs and performance standards for existing businesses. And they would be subject to initial and annual compliance inspections. And this would be to ensure compliance not just with the conditional use permit standards, but also with performance standards, which would be applicable to these deemed approved establishments and consists mainly of California Business and Professions Code regulations, which the state does require all businesses to be in compliance with. We also have updated our training requirements with this proposal. The training included in the proposal notes a licensee education on alcohol and drugs program in lieu of what we had before. This program is appropriate for off-sale establishments. The current training for responsible beverage service in code is largely aimed at on-site sales for on-site consumption. For tobacco, new and updated regulations with regard to tobacco, this would make all tobacco retailers non-conforming and require those retailers to obtain a tobacco retailer license. With this tobacco retailer license, they would be subject to all existing and proposed operating standards that we have on the books. There are allowances for smoke shops to be exempt from display area limitations. This is due to the nature of those use and those already being age-restricted establishments. It would also subject all tobacco retailers to an annual compliance inspection. For operational standards, currently for tobacco retailers specifically, there are no specific standards, so largely our operational standards proposals for tobacco retailers would fall in line and copy what we have for alcohol sales establishments. Again, in implementing site standard requirements, operational standards, and clearly identifying that flavored tobacco is prohibited, mobile vending is prohibited, window coverings that completely cover the window are prohibited, and excess advertising of tobacco and tobacco paraphernalia is prohibited. This municipal code amendment, the last part of it includes monitoring and compliance requirements. So all new businesses would be subject to an annual inspection upon initial compliance. Initial compliance in this case, and as proposed in this amendment, has been updated. Throughout this process, we did take input from all parties that wanted to provide it. So from parties that were supportive of this measure and parties that were against it. And one thing that we gained from businesses that could be subject to this ordinance is that they were not in favor of the rolling implementation idea. They had concerns that if it were a rolling implementation as we had initially proposed, then if there were businesses that were not in compliance, those that were subject to the first inspections based on their business license renewal would lose business to those that had a later renewal date. So as you'll see in this proposal and what is proposed now is just a 90-day compliance period. So initial compliance for deemed approved establishments and non-conforming tobacco retailers would be 90 days. They would have 90 days for initial compliance. The licensing aspect of that, it would essentially show on their license. They would be issued a revised license, and it would show on their license with a checkbox that they are deemed approved or tobacco retailer license. So patrons and city staff or code enforcement or law enforcement would be able to easily identify who is in compliance with the proposed measures. And with regard to violations, we clarified the violation schedule that's currently in code. An example of this is provided in attachment J of your staff report that clarifies how that process would work and the inspection levels that would be implemented. I would note there too that there is a level of implementation, I guess for lack of a better term, variability there up to the code enforcement officer. They do reserve the right upon a first inspection of a business, if it is such an issue with such an illegal activity going on, to recommend that right directly to the Planning Commission for review. Another thing that has been added is that the Planning Commission reserves the right to review deemed approved statuses. So if a business was granted deemed approved and they fell out of compliance for whatever reason that may be, the code enforcement officer could recommend that directly to the Planning Commission for revocation of that status. Historically, code enforcement would go through the 4 levels of fines, as noted in the staff report before they got there. However, they do reserve the right based on the issue that may be at hand or the violation to go directly to Planning Commission if that may be the case. For a brief example of what the non-conforming businesses would go through to gain compliance, they would start with their notification. 90-day compliance period would be notified. Staff would notify those businesses on the day of the effective day of the ordinance. Businesses would have 90 days to have their first inspection. If they failed that inspection, they would be afforded one 15-day reinspection, not less than 15 days, and have a reinspection. And if they pass that, they would be issued an updated business license and then be subject to annual monitoring. For new businesses, they would start with their entitlement process, move on to business license application. They'd have a 30-day compliance period before their business license where we want to make sure that inspection's completed. Again, a reinspection allowance is there, and then they would be issued the business license and subject to annual monitoring moving forward. They would be, every business once in compliance though, it should be noted, there is allowances for a complaint-based inspection. So if there are complaints received, code enforcement would be able to investigate those accordingly pursuant to this amendment, and there are investigative procedures outlining how that process takes place in the proposed amendment. And lastly, briefly on the enforcement schedule, new businesses, it would be effective to those they would be applicable upon the effective date of the amendment. So any new conditional use permit would have to comply with the amendment. Non-conforming businesses, again, would have 90 days to comply with this proposed ordinance, and compliant businesses would just be subject to annual review in conjunction with their business license renewal. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission conduct a public hearing, receive testimony regarding the proposed project, and take the following actions. Recommend that the City Council find the amendment exempt pursuant to Section 15061B3 of the California Environmental Quality Act, and adopt resolution number P-24-005, recommending City Council approval of Municipal Code Amendment Case Number PLAN 22-00002, with the allowance of minor clarifying modifications by the city attorney, and including the revised resolution as included in the late provided to the Planning Commission. And with that, staff is available for any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hadagi. I think at this point, I know we'll have some discussion and some questions. I think I would like to first open up the public hearing portion so we can hear from the public, and then we can move into any questions or comments. So with that, I will open up the public hearing portion on this agenda item number 2. Do we have speaker cards?
We do. Our first speaker will be Kenneth Archery.
Good evening, Chairman Kurth, distinguished commissioners, and city staff. My name is Kenneth Archery III. I'm a High Desert resident here before you on behalf of Funded with Lady K, a small business in Victorville, to provide my comments and educations on agenda item 2. While the California Department of Public Health has primary enforcement responsibility on AB 935, local flavor ordinances and local law enforcement agencies may continue to enforce local ordinances that are more restrictive than state law. Local governments can also more effectively make sure that the rules like flavored tobacco bans are followed properly, and that retailers are not selling to underage youth. It is a way to control the sale of these products at the local level without relying on the state to do enforcement, as they may not always be able to reach the stores in our communities. While the state law is a step in the right direction, other cities in San Bernardino County, such as Hesperia and Adelanto, have taken it a step further by implementing standalone tobacco retail licensing ordinances that provide the structure and the financial means for local enforcement of tobacco sales and are not dependent on the state of enforcement. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on this important matter. I trust that the Planning Commission will carefully consider all public input as you make decisions that will shape the community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Our next speaker is Mia Tanae Collier.
Good evening, Chairman Kurth, distinguished commissioners, and city staff. My name is Mia Tanae Collier Turner, and I am a Victorville resident. This evening, I would like to share with you a grant opportunity being offered by the Department of Justice. The Tobacco Grant Program for fiscal year 2024 to 2025 is an excellent opportunity to complement the tobacco retail license ordinance that the city is exploring. This funding will help enforce the tobacco retail license during the implementation phase of this program by granting financial support to local public agencies. We understand that compliance with SB 793 and AB 935 outline the sale of most flavored tobacco products in the retail environment may seem daunting. This funding opportunity can help support the city's efforts to ensure local retailers are held accountable and are educated on the charging tobacco retail laws. We are also happy to share that our government agencies in San Bernardino County have previously received this award from the Department of Justice, including our neighbors in Hesperia. We hope you and the city staff find value in this information. Thank you for your time, and I also have some fact sheets to give.
You can hand them over here.
Our next speaker is Linda Titus.
Good evening, Diocese Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. See, I'm off already. I would like to commend you on the work that's been done on this TRL DAO. We really do appreciate it. And I'd just like to say that, looking at the city of Victorville, You know, looking at the fact that we have a 33% higher crime rate than the national average, I think that we really are in need of this TRL DAO. I know for myself, I'm hesitant when I'm driving past businesses to stop. If the windows are covered with signage, if there are lotteries outside, and that I really can't get a real sense of what's going on from a safety standpoint. So I do appreciate you developing this TRL DAO with the input of our High Desert Community Coalition and the Tobacco Coalition of San Bernardino. Because, you know, our goal is to have the opportunities to secure employment in the area, home ownership, higher education, safe neighborhoods, and nearby desert, lake, mountain recreation. So let us approve this DAO and make these opportunities a reality here in Victorville. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Selena Thimes.
Good evening, Chair Kurth, Commissioners, City staff, and Deputy City Attorney. I just want to say thank you very much to all the resources that you have dedicated to this opportunity. I want to thank you very much for being committed to the residents of the city of Victorville, for actually listening to our concerns. We know that this has been a discussion that's been going on for many, many years, and I just want to personally thank you for taking the time, using your time and resources to actually produce this document. At this time, we're very, very happy to see that it's come before you. We know that this is only a floor for what we can actually do, but we do hope that you will support moving this forward so we have a foundation to grow an opportunity for our communities to be safer in the area of public health. We do know that tobacco is a real issue. It is a public health crisis here in the world, actually, not only in the United States. And so putting these systems in place for us to be more responsible about how these items become available to our community is very, very important. Thank you for exploring the idea of localizing this effort, for we are responsible for our community, and we want to make sure that we have the eyes on what is happening here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Olivia.
Good evening. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share a comment. I'm a resident transplant from Los Angeles. I really actually have grown to love the high desert. I love the community. I'm invested in the community personally and with my children. I do support this ordinance as I'm a mother of young kids. When I do go into, strip malls or buildings, I do kind of have to be aware of my surroundings. And I think that this ordinance will help reduce the loitering, the hanging around. I mean, it really is a problem all over, not just in Victorville, but I do support this ordinance. I think it would be a great addition to the rules that we have already. And it will allow us to not only feel safer, but appear it would maybe not be a blemish on the community to have such signage and not have our kids looking and saying, "Mommy, what is that strawberry on the sign?" And it turns out to be a cigarette ad or some kind of paraphernalia. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to hear us, and I look forward to building this community and seeing it grow.
Thank you.
There are no additional speaker cards.
Okay. And I will close the hearing, public hearing on agenda item number 2, and bring back to the commission for questions, any discussion. And I think I'll start to my right down here with Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd
Can you speak into your microphone, please?
just like to echo a concern by Ms. Collier, who stepped up. I really want to commend you for bringing at least funding ideas because, of course, with any implementation of additional enforcement means that we're going to have the resources to do it. So she brought this grant opportunity forward, and hopefully we can look into that. So I thank all of you that have worked on this. I'm real pleased with the outcome, and thank you.
Commissioner Cook-Askins?
All right, good comments, especially be able to get that grant for this. That's all I have.
Commissioner Marsh?
Just for some clarification, as far as the drug paraphernalia in the operating standards, now is because of the fact that a lot of paraphernalia has dual use, if there's a question about the actual usage or the proposed usage of a say a pipe or or whatnot, any type of paraphernalia, there's a procedure. I mean, the enforcement is not going to make a decision on their own right then and there, or is there like a method to where they will seek the upper review or as to determining what that paraphernalia is actually used for or mostly used for, or whether it should be on the shelf?
Thank you, Commissioner Marsh, for that question. The definition is based on the state law requirement of what's permitted and what's not. Code enforcement will always seek for clarification on an item they're not experts on. So not only with potential drug paraphernalia, they would start with the definition in code. We would then seek input from California Department of Public Health, and as much as they deal with flavored tobacco and any other entity that we could, for clarification on what an item is. Ultimately, there may be instances where an item could be used for illegal drugs, but it does have a purpose that's tobacco based. So there may be some items there that would I guess get past the code enforcement. To combat that, our code does limit the tobacco paraphernalia space that can be permitted. It does restrict it from being over the counter, so people wouldn't be able to just grab it by hand. It would be restricted service only by the counter personnel, and there is a limitation on the size. So there's a few protocols there in place to definitely limit the amount that can be displayed. And then with regards to what code enforcement would be looking at, I guess the simple answer to the question is yes, they would have resources to do more research to determine if something was specifically for drugs and not for tobacco purposes.
Little kind of a follow up to that question. Now, the state has their guidelines. Now, does the state allow the city to create their guidelines as far as, okay, the state may allow it, but the city knows that it's used particularly for drug usage. Can they disallow
it? We definitely, if it's drug paraphernalia, we prohibit it. And if it is tobacco paraphernalia, the answer to that question is yes. The state law with regards to tobacco does allow the city to enforce or adopt more more broad requirements on tobacco, tobacco and tobacco paraphernalia. So they can be stronger than what state laws are. So that would include paraphernalia.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Messon?
Yeah, I had a quick question. So with the 90 days initial compliance and the new licenses being issued, if our 120 plus businesses are all in compliance within that 90 days, does that mean their annual inspection will all be within that same 90-day window?
So the first 90-day window would be just to bring them up to speed. From that point on, it's written that the tobacco retailer licenses and those statuses are good for at least a year. I'm sorry. I apologize. I don't know the exact wording off the top of my head, but it's worded in such a manner that we understand that there may be businesses that comply with the 90 days and then 3 months later have a renewal inspection. In those instances, they will have another inspection in that 3 months. So once they get into the rhythm of the annual inspections, though, they will be good for the whole year.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that they were staggered in a way that our code enforcement team wasn't overburdened with 10, in a day or whatever. But that clarifies my question. Thank you.
I just had a question on the, I understand this is a the whole program here is stemming because the city's getting a grant? A state grant?
No, we have not applied for that grant. We are aware of it. And perhaps that's an opportunity to offset costs with enforcement of this in the future. This was largely driven by community input, as well as the Planning Commission. There was an item brought before the Planning Commission last year with the idea to look at these standards that we have in place. At that time, much of that proposal included the revocation of single serve across the board. And it also relied heavily on the annual inspection process to hold businesses accountable for the laws and use permits they already have and that are already on the books. What's obviously changed since then is our understanding of the California Business and Professions Code. So there are now allowances for the single serve to remain for those businesses that are non-conforming that already have it. However, with the proposal as it stands, there's allowances there to potentially revoke those allowances, keep it in the spirit of the original Planning Commission recommendation.
Yeah, I just saw in in our staff report, it talked about the grant that the state's offering the city specifically to help them. I guess they can't do their job, so they're asking the cities through a grant to go police flavored tobacco. It sounded in the staff report that that's what kind of started this somewhat. Otherwise, like I've never seen the city just say, "Hey, let's go help the state do what they're supposed to do." That's a little odd.
And if I could elaborate a little bit further, so we did include that mention of the funding opportunity, the grant, in the staff report. It wasn't a cause for this ordinance to become before you because we've been talking about it for so long, and there's other issues with the amount of non-conforming uses that we have with the city, but we specifically mentioned that in the staff report to let the commission know that based off of public comments that we received stating that the city should rely on the state to do the enforcement and not be the enforcer themselves. We just wanted to bring to light that the state actually is encouraging localities such as cities to do the enforcement for the state law that has been in place now, particularly for flavored tobacco. So it just goes to show, yeah, the state doesn't have the resources. Localities such as the cities that are familiar with the businesses and have the mechanisms and staff to pull off enforcement. They're most likely the most appropriate ones to do those enforcement actions.
Can I ask one more?
I'm sorry? Yeah, go ahead.
If there's a change in ownership of a non-conforming business, are they grandfathered or do they have to now comply with
You're asking if it's just a change in ownership?
change in ownership, same type business?
So that will not affect the implementation of this. If this was approved, regardless of any change of ownership, compliance will be required. But as far as like their existing allowances for alcohol sales, for example, those run with the land. So as long as the property is in operation and there's not a long gap, say like more than 90 days of the use ceasing, then a new business can go in there and carry on as if it was the prior business.
I had a second question was, do we have any, estimates of costs, for this new license? This additional it's an additional license to the business license, right?
Yes, it's called a license. There will be no actual new piece of paper. It'll just be a checkbox on the license. So the additional cost, the initial compliance inspections for everyone to come up to compliance will be free. There will be no cost for that after the first inspection and the 15-day compliance reinspection. Beyond that, code enforcement does have an established fee for inspection of $95. So that will be implemented on those businesses after the first compliance and the 15-day re-inspection. If they go past that, then those fees will be.
So that is that just like a fine based?
That's not a fine, no.
Everyone pays the $100 a year.
That moving forward, yes, when they get to annual after the initial compliance, it'll be a fee that it's established to cover somewhat the cost of the code enforcement inspection.
Okay.
It's an established fee that's there now. We think that the code enforcement time will exceed that by large sums. We don't know that, so erring on the side of caution, and because we have that fee established, that will be the fee that's charged on annual compliance inspections. It will enable code to do a fee study throughout the first year or two of compliance to see what the actual cost is, and then either allow the city to do a fee study and adopt a new fee if that be the direction we take, or look for grant opportunities to offset cost versus what the actual cost is.
Okay. And the only reason I'm kind of bringing that up is that, I wanted to make it clear that, if the city will be getting a grant, or if we already have, at the last, meeting, I had concerns with, wanting to know more details on what caused this. I know that there was public input that said, hey, we're seeing loitering at these shopping centers. And, don't get me wrong. Anyone who knows me knows that I've always wanted what's best for the safety and security and beautification of our community and of my town. And I thank everyone that's come here tonight. You're giving up your dinner hour to come here and testify for the betterment of Victorville. But with that aside, I'm struggling with the fact that, I asked for more evidence, not just some people saying, hey, I saw loitering. Yeah, I see it too. But what really happened with all the other crime and things I see around town that this became the precedent? We're going to ungrandfather a large amount of businesses based on, all I got was one paragraph in a 150-page staff report that said, yeah, there was some calls for service. I don't know if that was police department. I don't know if that was code enforcement. Normally, when we have issues like this, we get a list and we get to see, was that some kid swearing? Was that just some person loitering in front of a few businesses in a shopping center? Was this actual fighting? Was it crimes? Was it, more importantly, a business that was deliberately selling tobacco to underage kids? I don't know. And by the way, if that was, that's up to the parents. That's bad parents right there. So I'm being asked once again to charge a large number of businesses extra money, extra time, extra code enforcement time for all these inspections. All I'm saying is, please show me the justification, and I hate, once again, saying it that way, like you don't care about the city, Rob. Yeah, I definitely do, but I never have that many issues on these items. But this one, I wasn't given, if I had to justify and talk to businesses or the general public, how'd you make your decision, Rob? Well, it was, they said there's a problem. So I pushed the button, and I'm having a hard time doing that. So I give a feeling that the commission's, ready to go on this. I'm not sure I am. I wouldn't mind continuing it. I don't know what the other commission feels like, or if you're ready to go, then we go. But that's just how I feel. Yes, please.
For me, in essence, the only thing that's really changed or there's emphasis on is the drug paraphernalia. To me, the rest of this, reading the rest of this, the staff report, and these are things that these retail establishments should have been doing already. Yes? They should have been compliant already because we're talking about state regulations, we're talking about past city regulations. So these are things that these retail establishments should have already been functioning in.
Correct with tobacco and California Business and
Okay,
Professions.
and so this ordinance is just a way of better enforcing, a more organized way of enforcing what they should have already been doing.
That's a good way to
Yeah.
put it. Yeah, it provides a framework for our city to do annual inspections, which we haven't been doing on existing grandfathered establishments or ones that are even currently compliant with code that have conditional use permits that are not getting inspected annually. So that's one component of it. It provides a better violation protocol. So there's more guidelines on when there is violations, how to bring that forward to the planning commission for possible revocation. And to speak to the chairman's comments about evidence, we did pull numbers, calls for service. What was hard to derive was all of the different factors, because as we compared them to other businesses, particularly larger retailer businesses, it didn't show that there's a higher percentage of service calls. However, that's because these larger businesses are a bit much bigger. They have more patrons going to them. But what we can speak to is just that there is an amount of code enforcement time, and I'm not sure if you'd like to have our code enforcement official come up and give more testimony on their time dealing with some of these non-conforming businesses. It is difficult to pinpoint exact evidence on across the board, because there is particularly related to calls for service, is there's just other factors that play into that number of calls for service. But what staff's bringing forward is in line with prior actions by the commission, and it tries to address what was not addressed in prior actions, and that's the non-conforming uses that have not been in compliance or shown to have been in compliance with state or even local laws.
I'm just wondering why, if it's such a problem, and I'm not saying that sarcastically, like it's such a problem. I know it's important, and there are some problem children out there with this. But I'm just wondering if there were calls for service, and whether it was a code enforcement or a sheriff's deputy or whoever had to go out there, why couldn't they correct? Why couldn't, if it was a repeat offender, if it was loitering, or if it was, whatever was happening there, why couldn't that be corrected? Why do we have to have why do we have to have, an additional license, additional staff time, go there once a year? If it needs to be corrected, it's corrected. I mean, if we have to, the only way to really do it be to hire someone to stand there every single day to make sure they're not selling to a kid or putting up a poster. If they're bad, I saw the picture with the retailer with the landscape growing all the way out into the sidewalk. Why does it take a special license? Because if that was my house, I'd just be getting a notice and correct your mess. And I just kind of, I wonder why, just these grandfathered businesses, if we could already take care of them, and now we couldn't, but now we can. I have regulations in my business that I have to follow as state law with disclosures and to keep the community safe. And if, if somebody said, hey, we can add more license fees to these businesses, then they come in and double check the state's work on my business or your business. I'm just wondering, how far do we reach on this with this additional licensing? Hard for me to even answer that question, but it doesn't sit right with me when I see that, some of the biggest problems I see around town are, some of the big box stores with people walking out and stealing, and then there's fighting I see and all this stuff as well. So it's not just one, do we have to now charge every business extra so that we can police them harder? That's the question I can't answer. Are there,
I have one more.
go ahead.
Now, okay, I mean, the retail establishments that we're talking about, they're not opposed to this, right? They're in favor of it. They just wanted it to be even across the board. So that's where you came up with the 90 days versus the staggering annual renewal. So am I understanding that correctly? They were okay with it, but they just wanted to be fair, even across the board for every establishment?
I guess it would be hard to say across the board if they're in favor of it. We did receive a few opposition letters that were provided. But in large part, this ordinance is essentially enforcing laws that are already on the books. What this ordinance does is offer a systematic approach for the city to enforce those laws and help cover the cost of the city services to do those inspections.
But overall, they've been contacted. There's been communication between city staff, so it's not like they're blindsided by this. There's been communication.
Correct. They were all noticed initially. And we've met with some of them individually to discuss the proposed regulations. Again, that's what drove the 90-day compliance period instead of the rolling period. And I think something that I think is important to note to the commission that we learned in those meetings is that with regard to flavored tobacco, that many, if not, I don't want to say all, but many retailers are not complying by their own admission. They have told us candidly that they do not comply. And the reason they didn't want the rolling implementation period is because of their competitiveness amongst each other. And if they were the first one to be subject, then the store down the street who was not subject yet could then keep selling the illegal flavored tobacco, statewide illegal, because of when their business license was up. So that is information that we've been told personally by retailers.
And you said at the beginning that only 11 were in compliance, if that number's right, if I recall that?
Yeah, that 11 represents businesses with conditional use permits who would have operating restrictions on their entitlement.
Thank you.
I also would like to point out that I'm pro-business, especially pro-small business. However, I have grandchildren, and I'm sure that many of you have too. But there are places that you go in this city that you don't feel comfortable walking into because you don't see any rules being obeyed. But I think when we look at the other cities surrounding us, putting these kind of ordinances in place, putting teeth to these kind of ordinances, I think it's indicative of maybe the times that we're in. But I think that we need to have something like this because I've seen a lot of businesses, small, large, not really following the ordinances, the guidelines. So if we put this in place and we step up enforcement, I think that the city will be a lot better off.
I just want to echo that. And I think that just sweeping something under the rug doesn't solve a problem either. Clearly it hasn't, even though there's been previous ordinances in place that were put more than 5 years ago and they're not being followed. And I think this is just providing more of a structured way to follow those. So I agree with your sentiments on that.
All right, well, if we're ready for a vote, then we're ready for a motion.
I move for approval of staff's recommendation on item number 2.
I second that.
I have a first by Commissioner Thomas, a second by Commissioner Messin. I'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Marsh,
Yes.
Commissioner Messin,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cook Askins,
Yes.
Chair Kurth.
No.
Motion passes with Chair Kurth voting no.
Okay, thank you. And once again, I'd like to thank all of you folks for coming out here and showing support for this city. Things will get better. Thank you. Next up, we have the presentation of reports, starting with Commissioner Thomas.
I would just like to thank the representatives that have from the community that have come before us to speak on this issue. It's very important, and you've shown that it was important to you, so we've seen it. But thank you for being concerned enough to be here. Secondly, I sure want to thank staff for the work that they've done on this, because I think the intent is where we were going with it. And I think we'll be better off for it. Thank you all very much.
Commissioner Cook Askins.
All right, thank you everyone for coming this evening, and I concur and thank you to the staff for their work on this project. And one more thing, the city will be busy as the county fair will be approaching this month.
Commissioner Marsh.
Just echo Commissioner Thomas's statement and nothing else.
And Commissioner Messin.
I just want to thank staff, and then I also saw an advertisement for an information session on street vendors. So I just really want to thank staff that I know that was something we added in a couple of meetings ago in regards to that. So it's really nice to see that already in action. So thank you.
Great. And any comments or updates from staff?
Yes, I just wanted to make the Planning Commission aware that our California APA annual conference is coming up. We'll be sending more information out to you, but it's in Riverside this year, and it's starts September 28th through October 1st. Save the date.
Thanks.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Okay. And if there's nothing else, once again, thank you everybody, and have a good evening. Meeting adjourned.
So funny, so funny.